So, as you probably surmised from the last slide, we're going to be talking about stigmatization and gender today. So, the title of this talk is Building Blocks of Bias: How the Inclusion of Stigmatized Individuals, in this case women, can lead to bias in outcome dependent groups. And my name is Lindy Glett, and I'm a doctoral student at New York University. So, the first thing to really note is that women in the workplace are often stigmatized. So, a woman, even if she performs equally well as a man, she is stereotyped as lacking competence and efficiency. And because these traits are valued in places like the workplace, women are seen as less competent than men. So, what can happen is a woman and a man can both do the same task and do it in the same way, but the woman will be seen as less competent than the man just because she is a woman. So, the thing to consider though is that when we're working in a workplace context, we're often working in groups, not just as an individual. So, if we consider, a group like Congress, they have to work together to make decisions. And sometimes these groups like Congress even have women in them. So, once there's a woman in this group or when there are more women in this group, how does this really change how the group functions? So, what role does gender take in a group context when you are a member of the group? So it's not just what role does gender take in a group context, but when I'm a member of a group, how do I see gender when I'm a member of that group that I'm evaluating? So what we're really going to be thinking about here, instead of the gender of a person, we're going to be thinking about gender composition of a group. So, can gender composition affect intra-group evaluations of the group as a whole and evaluations of individual group members? So, will I see members of my group differently just because of the gender composition of my group? So, will this group level variable affect my evaluations of individuals within the group? And so, what this really brings up is the idea of, are men punished for their association with women? So, a man, for example, in a group that has more women in it, could he be losing out because he's in a group that's composed more of women and women are seen more negatively in the workplace? So, what we really need to do first, though, is we need to go back to this idea of, can group gender composition affect intergroup evaluations of the group as a whole and evaluations of individual group members? So, why might this be the case? Why could gender composition affect these things? So, the first part of research we can be looking at is work on stigma by association. So, what stigma by association literature shows us is that, if, for example, I'm sitting next to someone who's overweight, you might see me more negatively because you see me as associated with that overweight person. But what's really important is the stigma by association literature. This is about perceiving other people who are not part of the same group as you. What happens instead when you are a member of the same group as that overweight person? So how does that stigmatized individual affect your evaluations differently if they're part of your in-group? So what this really brings up is the idea of common in-group identities. So research on common in-group identities would really say that those group level variables, so like for example, let's say we have the rattlers, which is one group, and the snakes, which are another group. And the rattlers hate the snakes, and the snakes hate the rattlers. But if we tell the rattlers and the snakes that they're actually all part of one big group, they're part of the rattlesnakes, then the rattlers and the snakes will like each other more. So what this is showing is that this group level variable of being the rattlesnakes can change your evaluations of individual group members, so individual rattlers and individual snakes. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be looking at gender rather than being a rattler or a rattlesnake. So what we did is we had 22 5-person groups of management students, and they were assigned to be in groups with 2, 3, or 4 women. And what these groups are told is that their job is to build this Lego person together as quickly as possible. So they must work in a 5-person group to build this Lego man. And so how it's set up is we have a classroom. So at the front of the classroom, we see the original Lego model that they're trying to replicate. And throughout the classroom are scattered groups of 5 who are all given all of the necessary Lego pieces to build this Lego model. And so what they can do is they can send one person of their group at a time up to the original Lego model to look at it, and then that person comes back and they report to the team, oh, this is what's going on. So what's happening is all these teams see the other teams competing, and all these teams really have a varying gender composition from 2 to 4 women. So what their goal is to replicate this Lego model as quickly as possible and with as few rejections as possible. So they have to do it perfectly, and if they do it imperfectly, it will be rejected, and they'll have to keep working until they get the right Lego person. So that's really a measure of performance. After they're done with the task, they fill out a follow-up questionnaire where they tell us how much did each individual in the group contribute to the task, and also the group as a whole. How do they think about the group as a whole? Do they think the group is effective? Do they want to work with their team again? And things like this. And so when we look at results, what we find is that, gender composition does not affect performance. So the number of women you have in your group doesn't affect how you perform. However, as the proportion of women in the group increases, judgments of each other's task contribution decreased. So as you can see on this graph, on task contribution on the left, we have a range from 1 to 7 on the measure scale, and we have number of women, 2, 3, or 4. And the more women that are in the group, the less you think each individual in the group contributed to the group's performance on the task. And then, if we look at the group level variable of group effectiveness, we see the same pattern where you see the group as less effective the more women it has in the group. And I think that's important to note is that this effect is completely driven by group gender. So there are no effects of target or perceiver gender. So it doesn't matter if I'm a woman evaluating a woman, or a woman evaluating a man, or a man evaluating a woman. It's really just about this group level composition that's driving this effect. So groups with more women are seen more negatively. So as a proportion of women in the group increased, evaluations of individual group members were more negative, and evaluations of the group as a whole were more negative. These results suggest a potential unexplored consequence of gender diversity. So having a more diverse set of people where there are more stigmatized identities, perhaps it's hurting everyone who's associated with people with stigmatized identities. So the other thing we must ask ourselves is, do groups with more women behave differently from groups with more men? So when we did this research, we don't have videotapes of, how are these groups interacting with each other? How are they behaving? So perhaps groups with more women are behaving in a way that people dislike, so therefore the groups with more women are being punished for their behavior. But we can also look at this not just by videotaping, but by checking to see if people just have an expectation before the interaction of how the interaction will go. So when you have a group with more women, you might be like, oh, you know what, this is a male type task, playing with Legos is really male, and so we're not going to do very well. So you might go in with an expectation that the group won't do well, and then you'll see everything through that lens. So you'll see everything to fit your expectations. Another thing to ask ourselves is, does this affect generalize to other tasks? So this is a very specific task. We need to look at other kinds of tasks like this. And then additionally, what we should ask is, does this happen for other stigmatized identities? Is this something that's specific to gender? Or could it also happen for race or obesity? Does the stigmatized individual need to be stigmatized for their gender? So I just want to give a quick thank you to all my collaborators. So this is a paper in press with Tessa West, Madeline Heilman, Corinne Moss-Rakusin, and Joe McGee, and then everyone else at NYU. And so that is the end. Thank you, and check out our crowdfunding website, www.rockethub.com/7504-reading-emotions.